Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker is the newest installment of the Star Wars saga, and the plot follows Rey, Finn, and Poe as they lead the Resistance in their final stand against Kylo Ren and the First Order, but they are now aided by Emperor Palpatine, who was previously thought to be dead. Episode 9 was a movie that I was honestly not highly anticipating, mostly because the previous few Star Wars movies weren't all that great, and the fanbase's divided reaction to them really got annoying. Seriously. I got so sick and tired of hearing everybody go at each other on those who love or hate these films, and also complain about The Last Jedi being the worst film in the saga, that it almost made me lose interest in the franchise. I also think the ending to The Last Jedi didn't really do anything and make me excited to see where this film would go, but I was still hoping that this film would be good. Before I get into this film, this review will contain major spoilers for it, since I feel like it's impossible to talk about this film without getting into certain plot elements that happen in it. So if you haven't seen it yet, which I feel like everyone probably has by this point, go watch it, and then come back to watch this review. Now, let's get into The Rise of Skywalker. Let me just say right off the bat that my biggest problem I have with this film is how rushed, messy, incoherent, and convoluted the story is. Without a shadow of a doubt, this is easily the messiest Star Wars film to date. This film goes all over the place. The story feels like it's being made up as it goes along. It completely retcons or ignores events from both The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. It has too many plot holes to count. Characters feel either underutilized or undeveloped. The film's way too fast-paced to the point of exhaustion, and it leaves many unanswered questions and doesn't give much development to certain plot points and ideas. The first act of this movie is paced way too quickly and is bogged down with a ton of exposition that was unnecessary. Actually, the whole movie feels like that. It moves by so quickly, and there's so much going on, that it really doesn't give you time to absorb everything that happens. The story feels very disjointed and messy, and I feel like J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio went on Reddit one weekend and picked a bunch of fan ideas and theories and put them in the movie. I mean, the idea that Rey is a Palpatine is straight up a fan theory that had been around years before this movie even came out. This film feels like it's being made up as it goes along, and it jumps from location to location so much that it makes Rogue One look like child's play by comparison. The character work here is also weak, aside from the relationship between Rey and Kylo Ren. Their relationship throughout this whole trilogy is easily the best part of it, even though I think the way they wrapped it up here was incredibly underwhelming. Finn is once again relegated to being a side character. Poe Dameron, in my opinion, is quite unlikable here. Rose from The Last Jedi is basically useless here, and Lando serves no purpose here except to be fan service. General Hux gets the worst treatment of any character from the first two movies. Here he's revealed to be a spy for the Resistance, and then is killed off a few minutes later after that revelation. It was such a wasted opportunity for his character. They could have done something with him where he's a spy, and at the end when the Resistance is fighting the giant fleet of Star Destroyers, he could have helped them take them down. Him starting out being a villain and dying a hero would have been a great arc, but they didn't do that. The new characters are also underdeveloped and don't really add much to the movie at all. Kerry Russell's character Zori Bliss is severely underused. The character Janna has an interesting backstory of being a former First Order stormtrooper, but it's not given much thought since it's so closely revealed near the third act, and the Knights of Ren are basically useless. As a fan of Star Wars, I waited 4 years to see these characters be prominently featured in a movie, and J.J. Abrams did nothing with them. J.J. Abrams also manages to disregard a lot of what Rian Johnson set up in The Last Jedi. All development for the characters in that film is thrown out the window. It relies heavily on nostalgia and familiarity, which Johnson tried to stray away from in The Last Jedi, and the revelation that Rey's parents were nobodies is confusingly expanded with them still being nobodies, but they wanted to be because Rey is the granddaughter of the Emperor. The revelation that Rey is a Palpatine and the Emperor being in this movie in general makes absolutely no sense to me. I don't believe someone like Emperor Palpatine would be romantically involved with someone on Coruscant, have a son, somehow not find him and his family until probably during his reign as the leader of the Galactic Empire, and then form a plan to have Rey kill him so he can transfer his spirit into her body so she can become the Dark Lord of the Sith. He also managed to survive being thrown down a shaft by Anakin Skywalker, go to a Sith planet called Exegol, create clones of Supreme Leader Snoke so he can manipulate Kylo Ren to join the dark side, and amass a large fleet of Star Destroyers with planet-killing weapons. This film doesn't explain how he came back or how he amassed this large group of Star Destroyers after all these years after the events of the original trilogy. His return in this film also makes the ending of Return of the Jedi pointless in the end. That great scene in Return of the Jedi where Vader is conflicted on whether or not to save his son, and then throws the Emperor down a shaft, thus saving his son and bringing balance to the Force, means nothing now, since the Emperor survived and is the villain of this movie. It's obvious that the only reason J.J. Abrams brought the Emperor back is because Rian Johnson killed off Snoke in The Last Jedi, and he needed another big bad to fill in his place. I would have been possibly okay with it if they subtly set him up in the previous two films, but it's painfully clear that there was no plan to do so. I would have also been fine with how they brought him back by saying that he had a contingency plan in case he died, and this version of him is a clone. After all, the Dark Empire comic series did toy with the idea that the Emperor made clones of himself, so I would have been on board with it if they did it in this film, but they didn't. Ian McDiarmid does a fine job of playing the Emperor once again, but he really doesn't get much to do thanks to how poorly handled he is in this film. As Luke Skywalker once said, "No one's ever really gone." But the Emperor should have been long gone after the ending of Return of the Jedi. I already talked about the plot holes surrounding the character of the Emperor, but this movie also has a ton of others. For one, it's revealed that Supreme Leader Snoke was a clone created by the Emperor to sway Kylo Ren towards the dark side, but it was previously established that Snoke was around before and during the fall of the Empire, and that Palpatine previously knew about his existence. Unless they're talking about him being a clone that was being created during the days of the Empire, it basically retcons what was previously established in the Star Wars universe. Also, the film never explains who these Sith ghosts are that are on Exegol with the Emperor, and where they've been all this time. Also, how did Rey die at the end? She uses two lightsabers to deflect the Emperor's lightning back at him, and then collapses and dies, in which I could see the argument being made that she used all of her energy to deflect his lightning. However, both Mace Windu and Anakin Skywalker did the same thing to both Darth Sidious and Count Dooku, and came out of it alive, so it makes zero sense that Rey dies doing it. Also, when she died, why didn't she become one with the Force? The Sith dagger also makes absolutely no sense. It apparently has a long history as stated in the movie, but it seems the only purpose it serves is to find the Sith Wayfinder in the wreckage of the second Death Star. However, the Sith Wayfinder is only located in a specific spot, and I'd assume the Sith would have used it on a fully complete Death Star. However, Rey uses it on the wreckage of the Death Star, and still manages to find the Sith Wayfinder. It makes zero sense, and it's only in there to be a MacGuffin used to find another MacGuffin. There are so many other plot holes and inconsistencies I could talk about, but these are the ones that bothered me the most. Even though I've been criticizing this movie quite a bit, there are some things I did enjoy. The biggest positive I can give this movie is that the visual effects are nothing short of impeccable, and all the different worlds, the action sequences, the creatures, and the vehicles look fantastic. There was clearly a ton of hard work and effort put into the movie, and everyone who worked on them deserves a ton of praise for it. The action scenes are also pretty entertaining, even though I do think they are the weakest of the sequel trilogy. The score by John Williams is also pretty good, but I do think it is a bit weaker than the scores from the previous Star Wars films. Even though I'm not a fan of the way that some of the characters were handled, I will admit that the actors do give good performances with the material they're given to work with. Daisy Ridley, Adam Driver, John Boyega, Oscar Isaac, and Ian McDiarmid give fine performances, with Driver being the highlight of the movie. Adam Driver as Kylo Ren is easily the best character in the sequel trilogy, even though I was not a fan of the way they concluded his character arc in this movie. In closing, Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker is a mediocre and disappointing film that also happens to be a rushed and surprisingly unmemorable conclusion to both the sequel trilogy and the entire Skywalker saga. Even though I'm not a fan of The Last Jedi, I at least admire Rian Johnson for trying to do something different with the franchise. He tried to introduce new concepts and ideas that weren't in previous Star Wars films, and didn't rely heavily on nostalgia in the past films. However, this film goes back right to what Johnson didn't want to do, and it didn't work for me. Sure, it may be fun to see characters like Lando, Han, and Wedge Antilles make appearances, and even have characters from the prequels make vocal cameos, but at this point, it feels like pandering and cheap nostalgia since The Last Jedi didn't rely so heavily on that stuff like the past few films in this franchise have. This film is also incredibly messy, convoluted, and leaves so many unanswered questions that we'll never get the answers to. Then again, J.J. Abrams is known for that type of thing, so it doesn't surprise me in the slightest. This is easily my least favorite film in the sequel trilogy, and I'll be honest in saying this, I think this trilogy as a whole is the weakest of the saga. Say what you will about the prequels, and even though my least favorite film in the entire franchise is a part of that trilogy, at least George Lucas had a clear vision with it, and knew where he was going to take the story and characters in each installment, which I can't say the same for this trilogy. It's painfully obvious that this trilogy wasn't planned out ahead of time, and all three films feel so radically different from each other. Instead of giving each installment to a different director like Disney was planning on doing, they should have just let one filmmaker handle all three of them like how Lucas did with the original and prequel trilogies. It breaks my heart saying all of this because Episode 7 is one of my favorite films in the entire saga, and sadly it's a part of the weakest trilogy in the saga. This film isn't awful, but it's just a painfully mediocre way to end both this trilogy and this saga that I hold so dearly to my heart. I am giving Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, a C-.